All right, good afternoon, everybody. They're bringing the doors together, and we'll be able to start shortly. The good news is this is not sold out, so you can put your elbows out and have 2 chairs if you want to. I think that's probably because this is en inglés, and so they want to speak in English. And so what I've told people is I apologize for speaking in English. So long as you complain in French, that will be okay. So I want to just do a quick introduction of what this conversation is about. My name is Louis Gray. I work at Google. I haven't always worked at Google. Google's the biggest startup I've ever worked for. But prior to that, I've worked at companies as small as 2 people and as big as 200. And so I want to talk a little bit about what it means to be an early adopter who talks a lot about startups, who's the first one to use a product, and really how you can go about getting interest in your own product from those early adopters and press. We all talk a lot about how to make the code and how to go out and get seed rounds of funding, or A rounds of funding, or B rounds of funding, but there's a lot of work that also goes into the promotional side of your content and finding those first users and finding that first press. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So quick background on myself. I like to call myself a Googler, a blogger, and a dad of 3. Those are the things that take all of my time. The blogging part hasn't taken as much recently. You know, once I've come on the inside at Google, it makes a little less sense to cover every startup that comes my way. But it's something that I hold dear. It's something that I've really enjoyed doing for the last 6+ years. I do have 3 kids, 4 and under. That's them with the little Android outfits. 2 of them are twins, 1 is not. I'll let you choose which one's which. Prior to joining Google, I was vice president of marketing at My 6th Sense, which was a content aggregation company that focused on your personal interests. I spent 8.5 years running corporate marketing at Blue Arc, which was acquired by Hitachi Data Systems in 2011. But the really important thing that you want to know about is that I was a blogger and early adopter. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. 3 pieces. First, the role of early adopters and how do you find them. Second, finding out how to get to the right press outlets and actually succeeding. And third, making your service and story shareable. We're going to spend the least time on that because you've had enough conversations about how to get social media and how to share your story. So we're talking mostly on 1 and 2 today. Each of you has their own different product cycle. You have an idea, a really good idea, something that nobody's thought about. But it's really hard to get to the next stage. As you know, you sit down with a napkin or a whiteboard and you come up with your ideas, you talk to your co-founders, you talk to your engineers, and you find a way to make this product actually happen. The really hard part is getting code done. As you know, you sit down in front of the screen and where do you start? At some point, you're going to have to ship. You know, Steve Jobs said, real artists ship. Everybody ships. And so you have to make a decision. At what point do you reach out to your first adopters? At what point do you reach out and try to get funding? And at what point do you reach out and get press? And so we're going to talk about that process and where you can use early adopters and press in the cycle. As someone who's played both hats in this game, someone who's covered companies, someone who's pushed companies, and someone who's been that early adopter, I've experienced this firsthand many, many times. What might happen sometimes, especially if you have a web service, is that you'll start out in a closed alpha. People will call this the friends and family time. Basically, it's a service that goes out and not anybody knows about it, but they have exclusive invites and they can go ahead and test it. The value of this is that these people can use your product in a way that you never anticipated. They can find bugs. They can really tell you, you know what, I would use this if it was in my language. I would use this if it was on my tablet. There are different pieces of feedback that they'll give you that you'll find out are important that you didn't anticipate were important. This is the best time to reach out to early adopters, people like me. An early adopter is a strange person, and we'll get to that. But they really enjoy breaking your products and then helping your products. And so they want to get in there and kind of be your partner without getting paid, but to come in and really find out where all the weaknesses are and what they can do to take it to the next round. And so they can be especially helpful at that first phase of rolling out beta invites. They'll find people just like them. They'll be able to take it to their network where they've already proven to have some kind of expertise and bring your story to them as well. And once you've gotten past that phase, once you've worked with that early adopter for a while, once you've fixed your product a little bit, added some more features, listened to what they said, and got it closer to launch, you're ready to take it to your first press. And what's interesting about press is it's not just a one-time thing. Sometimes people do that. You know, we launched, well, how come they're not talking about us anymore? You haven't done anything in a while. And so one thing you want to think about with press is it's ongoing. I've seen a lot of companies do this especially well. If you can imagine, they have a company blog where every Friday they post the new features that they've done and their changelog. And that in itself becomes a press event. And if you don't roll out that frequently, maybe you take 3 or 4 features that you've done, put it in a single post, and make it your 1.5 release. That will give the people who covered you the first time another opportunity to cover you, but also reach out to those people who missed your story the first time. No hard feelings, here we have an update. And so you think about each one of these opportunities being a product cycle. Beta invites, enhancements, public launch, and you keep going. So first, we're going to talk about those early adopters that we talked about in the product cycle. I mentioned they're weird. People like me are very strange. They're risk takers, they're recruiters. Their interest in helping you with your product is that your product gets better and that they enhance their own reputation within the network as being someone who finds cool stuff and being someone who you can trust when they say, this thing is cool, you've got to sign up for it. And so they can work on your behalf to become your unofficial marketing and PR engine. And you'll be surprised how often this works, where a company thought they had to pay $5,000, $10,000 retainer per month to a PR agency, or hire a director of marketing, when all they probably could have done is talk to a few early adopters to spread the word and get that started. There's always time to have an agency, but you don't have to do it right away. And these early adopters are not compensated through money or stock, but they're compensated by having early access to your ideas, by having that one-to-one relationship with the CEO or the VP of engineering, and be able to have a real impact on what your product looks like. So today, through this discussion, we're going to talk about that and give a couple case studies as well. Here's what you can expect from those early adopters. What are they going to do for you? That's always the question. And the first thing is, they're not going to stop and look at your product and say, this is all it is, you know, it has all these bugs, it looks weak. They're going to look at what it is and what it will be. And it really is kind of that step of faith that you had when you launched your idea in the first place. You had a vision of what it was going to be like in 6 months, 2 years, 5 years. That early adopter is going to be the first user on a social network and have no friends and say, this thing's going to be cool once the following stuff happens. And that takes a leap of faith, and so they have to be a partner with you. You're going to want them to find bugs and request features. And so when you find this early adopter, they're going to have an ongoing email dialogue with you. Hey, how come this site doesn't work? And you write back, oh, we haven't implemented that yet. Or this doesn't work yet. Or you're not supposed to click there, sorry. Whatever those things are that really show a two-way discussion between the early adopter and you as a developer are critical. And the third piece, something that's really difficult to replicate, is using the network on your behalf. It's a bad idea for you to say, please, can you tell all your friends about my service? It's a good idea to ask them, hey, if there's anybody else who you know who could benefit from my service, please let them know. And that becomes a partnership. And they will do that. They will do that on your behalf without you even have to ask sometimes, be it on their blogs, their social stream, be that Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Google+, whatever they use. And they will help sell your story, and they'll do it again and again, especially as they get good feedback from the people that they're working with and from yourself also. So interesting thing about these early adopters, most of them go through 5 stages, and you hope they're in the first 3, but I've seen many, many people go through all 5 of these steps. And the first of which is in discovery. Many of you have found a service, it's the first time you've ever seen it, and you want to tell everyone, you're super excited about it. Hey, look, I just found Twitter. What do you mean you're not on Twitter? It's a discussion a lot of us had 5 years ago. Then you go through the promotion where you're telling everyone, come on, use Twitter, here's why you can use it, I can hear you in real time, I can get it on my phone. Whatever those things are that really make it useful for you, you're telling the whole world. Early adopters love stages 1 and 2. Stage 3 is when they're just using it. I think for a lot of services that we use every day, we're just in stage 3. Google just works, it's fine, I don't tell my whole family about it because it just works. Same thing with Twitter, Facebook, and some other more established companies. But if it doesn't work out, if for whatever reason the early adopter gets too big for their britches, and this happens, they'll start to feel entitled. Hey, remember when I did that post for you? You owe me. You should raise your friend limit on Facebook from 5,000 to 50,000, because that's how many friends I really have. You'll see these kinds of things come from them, and they'll feel entitled, and they'll start to pick on your site, and maybe start being negative. And if that continues to occur, they'll leave, and they might even ask their followers to go somewhere else with them. So sometimes you'll see that. You guys should stop using Facebook. Twitter's the new hotness. They'll say that. You guys should stop using this service, you should go use this. So we're going to talk about ways to avoid them getting into stages 4 and 5, and whether that's even important to you. Is it more important to focus on the mass market versus those first people? And I put a source on this. Obviously the presentation will be shared later, but this comes from a post that I wrote several years ago about the 5 stages. When you want to find these product advocates, the ones who are going to have real impact, you have to know your market, know your competition, see who's talking about it. This is not something you should take lightly. But you should consider your market and who's talking about your competition, who refers to them on their blogs and on their Twitter accounts and in their social streams. The better you understand your product, the better you understand those product advocates. You'll find the people who are already really excited about aggregation or RSS, the people who are excited about mobile photo sharing, the top photographers, the top fashion journalists, etc. Check those social streams, find out where they are, and then go ahead and reach out to them. And most early adopters, if they're good, assuming they have a strong network, they're really easy to find and engage with. They all should have their emails and Twitter and everything else available. So just a little bit of background on what I got to do with my blog. Some of this is really exciting. Each one of these stories I could talk to you an hour about. But some of these products, I was the first person in the world to use or introduce to the world. How many of you have used TweetDeck before? Or have heard of TweetDeck? Pretty good number. How many of you remember Beluga, which was this group chat application Facebook acquired a few years ago? Fewer hands. Okay. So a number of these applications have done especially well. 2 of them have gotten acquired by Twitter, 1 by Facebook. Some of them are doing very well and have millions of users on their own. And so I had a unique opportunity to find them on the first day and try and figure out, how do I sell that message and how do I tell people about these services? And some other of these products I got too early. Cadmus, also, the team was acquired by Twitter. Flipboard, you probably have heard of. FriendFeed, we'll talk about it in a bit. But other more concrete products like Google Reader, which was around for about 8 years before we announced shutdown of it last week. Some quick notes to highlight on these Twitter handles. The first person in Cadmus says, thanks to Louis Gray's coverage, we're dealing with a large number of new accounts. Welcome, everyone. So I like this because the guy says, because of the early adopter, we have this influx of new accounts. You look at Google Reader, a more established product. The author here is saying friends of the Reader team, and she doesn't just mention a bunch of lists for Follow Friday. She says why. She says it's for consistent, constructive feedback and cheerleading. That is the role of an early adopter, and that's why I selected this one. Because as an early adopter, it's two-way. You're not only telling the world and saying how great it is, but you're also constantly trying to help and make their product better, which reinforces that cycle. So I want to talk about a couple of these examples. There's 3 really quick we'll go through. The first of which is Feedly. Feedly is a smart RSS reader. It's gotten a lot of press just in the last few weeks with the Reader shutdown. They've launched and they have more than 500,000 new subscribers just in the last couple of weeks. And they put this tweet out saying the last 48 hours remind me of the night Louis Gray helped us launch. I really liked that because not only is my name dropped in it, but because they remember the individual attention I gave to them when they started. The interesting bit about Feedly is I found out about them really early in the spring of 2008, and they didn't launch until the fall. So for 4 months, while they were continuing to iterate and develop, they kept asking me questions about their product. What did I think? And I would look at it, and we'd go back and forth. And then we got to a point where they were ready to launch. And so I think I wrote like 3,000 words and put the post on there. It was super long. And just continued to evangelize it. And so they've been very strong after that. How many of you remember FriendFeed? A good number of you. FriendFeed is a fun story. They launched October 1st of 2007 by a handful of ex-Googlers. And it was an aggregation service where it took content from all around the web, from all the friends that you followed, and put it in one place. So you didn't have to follow them on Flickr and Delicious and Twitter and LinkedIn and all these places, but just FriendFeed. And you had everything and have conversations. So I looked at this and I thought it was pretty cool. But it didn't seem like everybody was there. And then it kind of hit me that there was one trick that I could do to get everybody to talk about it. And so March of 2008, I wrote a post with a very deceptive but useful headline, which said, elite tech bloggers joining FriendFeed in droves. And so what it did is it reinforced to all the people who were on there that everyone's getting on it. There's a party, you're all invited and you're missing it. I linked to everybody's accounts and to their blogs. And so all of those good blog people noticed the traffic to their site coming from my site. And they started to read my posts and they started to look at FriendFeed again and they all wrote about it and it just kind of fed on itself. And so this conversation happened on Twitter. Gabe Rivera, who runs TechMeme, which is a well-known tech aggregator if you know them, basically said it's apparent to FriendFeed users that the service tipped yesterday. What happened? Marshall asks. And Frederick says, well, I think it was Louis Gray's fault. It's Louis Gray's fault that FriendFeed jumped and had a lot of good fun. And Gabe says, well, actually, not only was it Louis's fault, but when he did that post, Robert Scoble wrote about it and TechMeme linked to it. And so what I like about this thread is you have these people independently saying, something dramatic occurred, it's Louis's fault, the early adopter gave it a kick. So FriendFeed went from kind of being off people's radar to being a big deal. It was always in the conversation, Facebook, Twitter, FriendFeed, for a couple of years. And they were eventually acquired by Facebook for about $50 million in pre-IPO stock, which eventually was worth hundreds of millions. Again, early adopter gets zero money, but it gets kind of a reinforcement that we were onto something. And I had a lot of fun with this story. A gentleman named Mark Evans dived deep into this after the Spark, and he said, well, why did this happen? Did FriendFeed tip because the founders were super aware? Did they have a kick-ass PR team? No, it was actually because an evangelist kind of seized on it and never let go. And he actually gave me a lot of credit, which was fun to highlight. But it shows the kind of power that an early adopter has, that they can really push and sell that message for you without you having to do anything. And I remember calling the FriendFeed team that night and saying, hey, are your servers okay? And they're like, yeah, we're fine, which was kind of cool. So there's another Google URL we're going to have, but that's a good example. TweetDeck, I mentioned. A guy named Ian Dodsworth is the developer of this. And one day I'm on Twitter and I look and it says via TweetDeck from somebody's update. I'd never seen that before. Remember, this is in the day when everybody was coding for Twitter and every new application was a story. And so I checked it out and I contacted him and he said, well, no one's written about it yet. I'm just working on it. Do you mind if you give me a couple days? So I said, all right. So in a couple days, I looked at the product, tried to understand it, and it was revolutionary compared to what was around. If you guys remember Twitter in that time, in 2008, you had a small little app like Twirl that you could use on your desktop. That was just for sending messages and that was it. But it certainly didn't consume content in columns like TweetDeck did. It didn't have embedded search like TweetDeck did. It didn't have grouping of all your friends like TweetDeck did. And I think for a few years, when you would go to conferences, everybody's browser would be set to TweetDeck. And you could look around at LeWeb and see it, TweetDeck everywhere. And so I got to write this first post, and it was a really challenging piece because there was a lot of content to cover. But how do I get that message? Guys, this is new. This is solid. You have to check it out. And was I going to undersell it? I was always worried about talking about a developer's story and not doing it enough justice. So the next day, a site called TweetTip would look at all the analysis of Twitter. You could search the keywords and see how often it got pushed. And so TweetDeck was almost a zero, almost a flat line, until that post came out. And they put this as like the flashpoint that made the change. And Ian told me, he said, the blog post you wrote and the resulting mayhem essentially forced the private beta wide open, and we went public. Again, he gives me all the problems. So it's a really interesting thing to see, again, early adopters, you get a story and you push it out there. So enough with the case studies. So how can you find these people? How can you find the weird people like myself who like to get deep into the product and like to be that partner with you who's on the side, who wants to make it even better so they can use it every day and tell all of your friends? What kind of contract can you make with the early adopter to bring them value? So for me, the first bit is making sure you're targeting correctly. You know, are you finding someone who really cares about your industry and your product? I often get a lot of pitches for mommy blogs or fashion or food, which isn't something I'm going to write about a whole lot. But if they come to me with the right story, then I can go ahead and post that. You can explain up front what the stage of your product is in. If you come to them and say, I'm in early beta, or we're planning to launch in a couple of weeks, or we're at this phase, you clearly identify what it is that you're doing and what you want them to do. And I say an explicit action. You know, so an early adopter, you say, well, I want you to sign it up. Can you please kick the tires? Can you look at our iPhone app? Can you give it to your friends? Whatever that action is, be clear about it. Make sure it's a two-way discussion so that you're having the conversation with them and that you actually are listening so that you can get that kind of feedback in real time. And give them a kind of timeline. Like I mentioned Feedly. Feedly essentially said, we're going to launch in the next month. They ended up being wrong. And every time they had a delay, they would send me a note, it's going to be a little while. And so it was a little bit off my radar until they came back. But usually someone says, we're going to launch in 2 weeks, and you kind of have it in your mental note in a calendar. All right, it's almost like an assignment. In the next week or two, I have to check this out and get the story right. So that's a quick run through on early adopters, and we'll come back to that. Second bit is talking about press. Now, press can be a challenge, as you can imagine. There's people always worried about good press and bad press. When do I go? How do I find the right targets with this? And there's many different reasons you can go ahead and try and get press. If you're someone who is coding an app and you want to release it to the world, you might want to get your first users of it. You might want to find a co-founder. You might want to get funding, get new advisors. There's all sorts of good reasons to go ahead and get that press. If the goal is instead to get users and drive your user count from 0 to 500 or 1,000 or 1 million, whatever your goals are, you want to make sure you're going to a target publication that understands your market and has a track record of driving new users. You can make them feel important by giving them an explicit ID code, an explicit invite code. You know, like if you use TechCrunch, the first 500 people who use the TechCrunch code will have access to my app. And what you want to make sure is you're not bringing the same story to each publication. This is something that's really, really common. You have an insert name goes here, dear tech blogger, I have a story for you, please cover it. So you want to be very careful and make sure that you've gotten a lot of work up ahead to make sure that you know who you're talking to and what it is you're talking about. So here's what you can expect. Now, often people say, well, I sent this press release out, nobody covered it, and I got no traffic. Something happened in the way. You want to think, how much time does a press person have to really get to know your product? Nobody knows it better than you. Behind you, the people who know it almost as well are your first users and your early adopters. Well after that is going to be the press person who's also got 20 other items in their inbox and 5 stories they need to file that day. So you need to make it easy for them. You need to make it easy for them to understand especially what it is that you're selling, what kind of market you're in, what that story is that you want them to tell. They will always provide some kind of summary. You know, they'll say, oh, they're in the photo sharing space, or they're doing speed of light travel. Whatever it is that you're providing, you can go ahead and see a story like that. And they'll give a very clear user action. And that can be something as simple as go ahead and check out their website to download the iPhone app or sign up to be on their beta invite list here. That's what they'll do. Even in the stories that are only like 2 or 3 paragraphs, there's always a call to action for a user. And for press, it's not their job to say that you're going to be the winner. It's very rare where they say like 4 squares here, everyone else needs to shut down. What they're going to do is be skeptical. They're going to say, oh, there's an opportunity here, it looks like the Instagram of video, or whatever it's going to be. Could they put Google out of business? It's probably not a story they're going to write. And so they're going to be skeptical. And it becomes a challenge as an entrepreneur to say, well, maybe they didn't get my story right. But that's why you get an opportunity to do it again and again. So some quick things to look at with press. There's really 5 storylines that you can expect will get a lot of attention. And some of you will have the value of having these immediately. Others will take more time. The first of which is having a person of note participating in your company. Many of you have seen this. If you'll have a headline that says, PayPal founder starts Tesla, you know, something like that. Or former Googler start wireless payment company. And so what you'll find is, if they have a track record of success, it's going to be easier to write the story. If a VC firm that everybody knows from Sand Hill Road has invested in you, they're going to also pay attention. You know, Anderson Horowitz funded company introduces new product. If you have a top incubator class like Y Combinator, you see that. Like TechCrunch has a good coordination with YC, and so Y Combinator apps will come out and you'll see them talk about whether they got funding or what level of announcement they're at. It's pretty much guaranteed. Third thing you can do is piggyback on a major trend. And so for a lot of you, you'll see what's going on in the web and say, okay, well, how can I get on the story like Pinterest? Or how can I get on a story like Sumly? Sumly was acquired by Yahoo a few days ago for $30 million. Maybe I'm a lot like that. Maybe people understand me if I say I'm Sumly, but for mobile in this direction. You know, if you can find a story to say, if you liked Sumly, then you like this as well. The fourth one is the most challenging, which is doing something dramatically disruptive and magical. And I don't mean something like Google Glass or driverless cars, although those are fun. But I mean something like a Segway. Now the Segway didn't light the world on fire, but it was dramatic and it was different. It was something that really caught your attention and took a lot of time to understand. And that got a lot of press because it was dramatically different. And then number 5, making an existing popular product even better. What if you brought an add-on that made Twitter show 400 characters at a time, or streamed entire YouTube videos from a tweet, or whatever those things are that are going to make the product just a little bit better? You could make the argument that TweetDeck was doing number 3, number 4, and number 5. They were doing something that was disruptive. It was piggybacking on that trend of streams and social media, but it was also making a product that people already knew a lot better. So once you've thought of all these things, you have your storyline, you've got your issue, now you want to take it to the right press. And this is a hard part. One thing that I always tell people is you have spent a lot of time, your life's work, in coming up with a good idea. You've spent hours, days, weeks coding. Well, why not spend a little bit of time and get the press bit right? Because it could be critical to get that story right in the press. Even if you don't have a marketing person, or if when marketing comes up, your eyes start to glaze over. You want to start to get that story right from the very beginning, because it's really critical. You want to pick the right targets, maybe 5, maybe 10 people you think you have a good relationship with, or people who've covered the space well before, and reach out to them. You give yourself some time. Often what will happen is you'll get a notification saying, hey, we want you to cover this story. We've got a beta that goes out at 8 a.m. tomorrow. It's not enough time. So you definitely want to have time between when you send them the original email and when you have a time for a follow-up email, and possibly time for them to talk with the executives or whatever they need to do to get the story right. And personalize that message. And when I mean personalization, I don't just mean dear first name. I still get a lot of that. Dear tech blogger, you've covered about this before. What you want to do is find out what it is that they're truly interested in. We understand you talk a lot about mobile photos. Hey, I saw your article that you did on Sumly. If you really care about that, you'll love what we're doing. It's twice as fast. Okay, well, check that out, right? Because you got to pique their interest. And it doesn't hurt to take a little bit of time and do your homework. I've seen this done badly as well, obviously. Dear Lewis, we saw your recent article on Fitbit. Therefore, you want to talk about our botanical gardening. No. Where did you get that idea? But sometimes what they'll do is they'll just crib like the first post that you recently wrote, and you don't want to do that. So I want to do a quick study of one of the things that I did when I was working at My6sense. My6sense had been around for a couple of years, but they had never gotten away from iOS and delivered their personalized aggregation solution on Android. So what we wanted to do with this story was have people not only reiterate the My6sense message, but talk about reaching a brand new type of user, the Android user, and be able to bring a brand new application to Google Play where we're starting from scratch. So what we did was we crafted a message. We made the APK file from Android available well in advance for any of these press people, probably 10 days to 2 weeks ahead. We made time for them to talk to the CEO and myself to do an interview and understand why it was valuable, what we had done with My6sense and Android that was special. Then beyond that, we not only talked in face-to-face if we could, and on phone when we could, with the tech press that everybody knows, the TechCrunch and VentureBeat and Mashable and the Next Web, but we also talked to the vertical publications that love Android, the ones that thought we were going to go the extra mile and probably don't hear from people like us very often. So we called Android Guys, we called Android Army, we called Android Police, and we gave them the same story and the same type of quality message that we'd given the other teams. And we gave them the same deadline as everybody else. And so, as you can see from my tweet spam on the right, we got covered by just about everybody. And they all sold the same message. You know, My6sense brings this personalized content ranking app to Android. And it wasn't just the TechCrunch and the ReadWriteWebs that covered us, but it's also Android Guys and Android and Me, etc. And the way that we had done that was through our careful planning of getting the message right, getting our targets right, making the APK available early, and making time for people to have the conversations. So you might wonder, all right, what does a good pitch look like? You know, if you don't have that personal relationship with somebody, what is it in the pitch that needs to come through that will get you interested? And so I use an example here from Backtype. Backtype was an interesting product. It was a comment tracker where if I left a comment on a site all around the web, there's no way that I can follow all the sites that you like. But I can follow your comments now on Backtype. And maybe that will alert me to conversations that are interesting, alert me to blogs that you like. And so they introduced this cool product. And what I liked about this pitch from Christopher Golda is it was personal and it was relevant, gave an explicit update on the product, and talked about timing. And so this is something that clearly showed me that it took more than a few minutes. So he says in here, you know, I want your feedback and your suggestions. Sorry for the delay. You know, here's the account that you can sign up on. Here's some issues that we have right now. So don't be surprised if it doesn't work well in Firefox. Notice he doesn't mention Chrome. This was 2008. Chrome wasn't around. And then he says specifically, in regards to our launch, we're not sure when we're going to time it. So he's being honest with me. Look, it's not in the next month. We just don't know, but I'll totally keep you informed. You can go as soon as TechCrunch posts. Remember the whole TechCrunch Y Combinator thing. So as soon as I saw it go on TechCrunch, I could post 1 minute later. I could have my post ready, wait for them, then I go. And then he also says, let me know if you have any questions or if there are some other people you'd like included in the beta. So in all of those pieces of what I said you want to say to an early adopter, it's a win across the board. He's given me the specific thing that I need to do. He's given me the opportunity to expand into the network. He's told me what he wants me to do once I'm inside of his app and says it's not perfect. But I can write about it as soon as he's ready. Here's another good example. This was a follow-on story from a company called Taloo. Now Taloo let you take your RSS feeds from Google Reader and compare them to those of your friends. And it would recommend blogs that you don't already read. And they would rise to the top. And it would show what those popular blogs are that your friends are reading that you might not be. So Caleb was working on an update to the product, and he says very specifically in the headline, filtering options and 9 new RSS feeds for Taloo. That catches my attention. Here's what's happening. And then he gives me a date. Lewis, tomorrow at 7:30, we're rolling out these updates. Okay. We saw such great usage, I thought we'd want to do this, so it explains why. I've attached a screenshot showing the new options. How easy is this for me as a blogger to say, okay, tomorrow morning, anytime after 7:30 Eastern, I can post a story. It's already pretty much written itself. I know what Taloo's updating, and I have the screenshot already there. That's totally convenient. The chance of my writing this post, as opposed to, hey, we're going to come out with something, this is much higher. So you can better believe I took a little bit of time to schedule it in Blogger and sent that out. But not everybody does a great job when it comes to communicating with press. And I think some of you guys see this in your regular email, and I still get pitches like this every single day. You send it to the wrong person. How great do you think I feel when it says, Dear Mike, in my blog? It could be a great story, but that didn't really work. Or Dear Louise. Simple problems like that. So spam is spam, even if you have good intentions. Sending it to the wrong blogger, or you're sending it to the wrong topic, really means you haven't done your homework. And even if you have a good product, if you're hitting the wrong place, it's not a good product for that person to review you. Real basic stuff, spell checking, rereading, confirming. If you have a fantastic product and you don't sell it to me well, you haven't done a good job with your intro email, that's going to make me think less of you. It's going to make me not so sure that I want to take the time to go through your product if you haven't taken a lot of time on that intro. And then conveying a lack of preparation. It's obvious to me, as someone who's going to take the next hour or 2 hours or a few days to really go through your product, that you didn't take that much time to put together your initial pitch. And sometimes I'll get something where it says, Dear Tech Blogger, and it's sent to themselves and you were BCC'd. What that tells me is they've got a huge list of people and they were just hoping they were going to blast it and everybody gets the same story. Sometimes it's even worse, where you'll get the entire CC list of every tech press person they could find, which you happen to be on. Great, now I have all their emails. But that certainly isn't a way that makes me feel like I'm going to write them. Not good at all. So real quick on getting your story legs. You have to take it from that initial early adopter phase. You've reached out to your first press. Maybe it was great, maybe it wasn't as perfect as you wanted. How can you get the people to continue to sell your story? The first thing is pretty straightforward, and that's making your story shareable from your site. How do you let people invite other users, whether they connect via email, find your friends on Facebook? Can you +1 it? Can you tweet it? Can you Facebook like it? Is there something you can do to take your content out of one place into another place? How can you recommend this application to a friend? If you can make it shareable, go ahead and do it. It's never hurt anyone. And the second bit, which I think is equally as important, is continuing with that fast iteration. I mentioned earlier, if you're somebody who makes regular updates to your product, tell the world about it. And that doesn't mean be hyper-aware and hypersensitive and reporting every single day. But find a way to package up your updates in a way that's interesting and get that message out, be it through your company blog or a simple follow-on email like the one you saw from Caleb, where he said, hey, we've had some updates and here they are. And that will enable not only that the original poster who covered you the first time will post the follow-on story, but the people who missed the boat and didn't cover you the first time are going to get that chance to cover you a second time. Well, it'll say something like Feedly, which has had a lot of traction lately, rather than saying Feedly, who we forgot to write about last time and now we're catching up. They'll get the right story. And the third bit, which is super important, one of the reasons that Google's done well, is scale. Keep your service up and avoid mistakes. All of you have bumped into a product which, for whatever reason, has crashed under user load. And some people wear it as a badge of honor, like, hey, we got TechCrunched. We got enough traffic that we went down. Well, you shouldn't have gone down. If you'll notice back in the FriendFeed story, they were commending FriendFeed on getting so much traffic and not crashing. And so one thing you want to be really careful about is making sure your system anticipates the user load that could come when you reach your first 50 users, 500 users, 50,000 users, or whatever that metric is that you think is really going to have dramatic impact. You don't want to make news for the wrong reasons. And when you think about it, kind of a summary, early adopters and press make you go faster. They make you better. They really amp up the type of outbound that you can do and help you find even more users and reach that story in more places. Business does take more than ideas and money, like we talked about. Great ideas, great funding, great team, no story. A perfect example of that is the company Color. If you guys remember Color, launched a couple years ago, and what were the main headlines? It was the team from iLike, former CEO, starting a new business, $90 million raised in funding, product was a dud. Just didn't do anything. Money does not solve all the problems. I worked for a company for 8.5 years that raised $250 million. Sounds nice, but it was in 8 rounds, and the original people who invested got completely wiped out when we recapitalized later. And so money doesn't solve all issues. What can solve issues is revenue and users. And when you have that revenue and you have those users, they can really help you a lot. And the early adopters and the press are the people to take you to that level. My dad always used to tell me, if you do something bad, 7 people will tell their friends. If you do something good, 3 people will tell you. And so your goal is to try and keep that ratio of 3 happy people to 1 unhappy person, and you'll grow your total market. I don't know if it's a 7-3 ratio in real life, but it's very easy for someone to go on Twitter and complain about your product. It's harder for someone to go on and praise your product. For some reason, it's just not human nature. And so what you want to do is continue to do such a good job that the people who really love your product and want to make noise about it can and do regularly. And they'll do that. They'll bring that story to hundreds of people or thousands of people, especially the press that have significant following. And there aren't any shortcuts. What I didn't do is come up here and say, profitability in 30 minutes. This takes effort. And if you think about making your product, I'm not going to tell you it's easy to make your product. It's not easy to find the right people. But it can be easier once you've found them to have them spread your message and get that word out. And hopefully some of these tips will help you think about what you're doing when you're about to make that initial push to find the early adopters and find the press. And you've seen the examples of what can happen when somebody gets really behind it and pushes on your behalf, even though they don't work inside your building. And so what I wanted to do is wrap up real quick and give us about 10, 12 minutes to talk on Q&A. I'm probably among the easiest people to find on the web. That's intentional, because then I get to find out about all the cool services that you're working on. In the real life, I actually get to work at Google, which is kind of cool, okay? But I still love hearing about all the new services that you're doing. A lot of you are using our products as well, and I'd always love to hear about that. So with that, we'll take questions. I don't know if they have a mic floating around. Looks like it's in the back. Right.
Hello. Most of the use cases and examples were B2C products. Is there some major difference for B2B products?
Right. So the question was, most of the examples around business to consumer. You tell me if I'm wrong. And is there some similar thing for business to business? And there definitely is. The company I mentioned where I worked 8.5 years, we sold with an average sales price of $350,000, and the average product had several hundreds of terabytes going out on it. And so the number of customers who we had, we could count in the dozens and eventually hundreds. So I got to spend a lot of time trying to find people who would speak on our behalf. And in the B2B world, it's not usually an end user like myself, although you can find end user customers to give great stories, but it's often the analysts who you'll talk to who will spread your word and say, yes, they're on the right path. And so you do need to work with the analysts and the press who write those stories, be they the technology publications like InfoWorld and eWeek, Information World, that are going to do that for you. And so I did spend a lot of time on the other side of the fence doing the B2B pushing. And so for you, again, it goes back to the market. You know, who is covering your content, who's using it, who's talking about it. And one thing we didn't really discuss is customer success stories. You know, once you're in the enterprise, it makes sense to sit them down on camera and talk for 3 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever makes sense. And that's something I've done a lot of in the past. Definitely works.
Is there a secret method for damage control? You know, the product launched, it was okay, but it crashed, and now you have to mitigate the damages to your public exposition. So, do you have any tricks for maybe by using those early adopters? Who will certainly begin to trash talk about your product? Is there a way, or maybe the secret solution is not saying anything?
So if I got that right, you could tell me if I'm wrong. So basically talking about mitigating problems if you've had a crash and if you can use the early adopters to help you with that problem? Okay. First objective, don't have a crash. Second objective is for the early adopter, again, as we mentioned, they should see beyond the current state of the product and say, where will it go? Take a look at Twitter. Twitter went down all the time in 2008, and people expected it to die. A lot of people wrote about that. They talked about it crashing. And so that was why you saw services like Plurk or Identica, if you remember that. They talked about having an open source solution that would replicate Twitter. And those didn't take off as well, and part of the reason that that happened was because Twitter got their act together. And they've done a tremendous job recently where they just don't have a fail whale anymore. And so what it takes in that situation is, are they providing a service that's so good that you can work around any intermittent outages? And if you clearly communicate, you know, going dark is a bad thing, but clearly communicating, we're working on it, we know what the problem is, we're getting more resources, what is it we're doing, people will be on your side. The evangelists in this case will give you a bad time because you deserve it, but then they will keep the push on and say, hey, they're back up, everyone let's go back. And that's a pretty common response. Thank you.
From my own experience, it seems that it's more easy to find early adopters if you meet them directly. I mean, in real life, trying to reach them by email or social networks is most of the time really difficult. So is it the same? Would you say the same, or it would be possible to reach them just using without meeting them for real?
I think the question there is essentially around being easy to find people on email and social networks who are these early adopters, right?
No, in real life. In real life. I mean, if you, for example, if I meet you right there and I discuss with you, it will be easier for me to convince you to use my product instead of trying to reach you by email at first.
Well, if I'm here face to face, I mean, especially right after this, I'll only have 10 minutes and it'll be condensed. One of the beauties of email is it's searchable and readable at leisure. And so what often will happen, and this has occurred to me, I remember one time I was at South by Southwest, and just by chance, a guy sitting directly to my left, he and I talked a little bit, and I realized that he had a really cool product. And I said, you've got to talk to me. And so we traded business cards. And about a month later, he sent me a note and said, I sat next to you at South by Southwest. We're ready to launch this product called Lazy Feed. I want you to be the person to break the story. And so we converted from a face-to-face relationship to an email relationship, and then later face-to-face again. But what you need to do is have a way for them to be searchable again, because when you go to a conference like this, or when you meet someone face-to-face, yes, it's memorable, but it also can get lost in the shuffle, and there's no record of it. Not until Google Glass, anyway. Yeah, there's no easy solutions. You know, obviously, if we've had a face-to-face construct, you know, it's going to be easier to remember you the next time. And so that means don't be shy. And so that's okay. But obviously, if you have the email, you can go back and search it. And I was able to go back and find these from Backtype and Tolu and others, where you have that discussion and find out what went on.
Yes, hi. I've got a question from a Google Plus Hangout that's watching this.
You're cheating.
Yeah, I'm cheating. So anyways, they wanted to know about early adopters when we were talking about the stage 4 and 5 earlier. And what do you do if you have somebody that's really prominent, who has a lot of influence?
Of course you do.
Yeah, that's getting into that 4th and 5th stage and they start turning negative.
Well, so obviously if you have somebody who's very prominent on your service and they start to think that you're not delivering, one thing you want to consider is whether you've optimized your service too much for the early adopter already instead of the core message of what you wanted to do. Are you getting away from the core value of what your product was? Does it make sense to adapt to what their new demands are? Or does it make sense to stay true to your straight vision? What I've found with these people is sometimes if they've wanted to change from one network to another, one product to another, is they usually don't if their friends don't go with them. Because people want to be loved. And so what if they want to do, if they have a small network in an area and they say, oh, I'm going to go use this instead. If the team tries to look at it and doesn't like it because the other product's working for them, then that's a clear message that it's working for the mainstream, even if that early adopter is trying to get attention. Is it unusual for a big name to make noise about switching? No. Do they actually switch? No. Okay. I hope that helps.
Okay. For me, I want to know if there is any means or tips to test my product before launching it. So I mean, without spending money and resources to know if there are some people who are interested in my value proposition or product.
So I think, I'm going to make sure I'm not answering the question wrong. So you're saying, is there a way to detect your project if it's interesting to people before you launch it?
Yeah.
That is exactly why you have that closed beta. I think when we put the product line out, and I can scroll back in it, we talked about the opportunity that you have of creating your product here. And what you want to do after you have your idea and you've whiteboarded it and you started to code, when you have that closed beta, it really is, or sorry, closed alpha, it really is closed. And that means, hey, I want you to use it, but don't tell anyone. As a blogger, I would love to find services before they were supposed to be talked about, and sometimes I would talk about them because nobody had given me an embargo or a rule. But if you have a closed service and you want to keep those people in there, maybe the feedback is, hey, this isn't going to work. I remember explicitly there was one product where they were about to launch, they were in beta, we wrote about it, and then they closed less than 3 months later. Because they decided that their product was never going to be good enough to go into the market. It wasn't ever going to be solid enough and they need to just walk away. And that's not a decision that's easy to make, but it's the right decision to make before you've spent hours and years and money on it. So in this phase of closed alpha, that's a great time to make a change. I think the perfect example of this is Instagram. Does anybody know what Instagram originally was? It was actually another location service like Foursquare called Bourbon, B-U-R-B-N. You guys can look that up. And I was actually a user of Bourbon, where you would go back and have like an intimate social network of locations of where you are. But one thing that was interesting about Bourbon was it had really interesting photo filters built into their service. And it turned out that that was the piece that got a lot of interest. People would take photos, they would make a different filter on it and apply it to that location. Instagram realized that that was the key selling point for their service. They changed their company completely, launched as Instagram, and sold for $1 billion. It's not bad. And that came right here in the closed alpha. Now you got 2 Hangouts? What's going on over here?
Any more questions?
Cool. Well, if we don't have any questions, I'll give you 4 minutes of your life back. And I definitely appreciate you guys coming and listening and talking. Thank you.
Thank you.